Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving into Echo's story of how we started to where we are now. We're also going to be talking about why child abuse prevention education is so important now more than ever. And on top of that, we're going to talk about how you can help and jump in. So joining me today, we have four phenomenal women. We have Lucy Lee, our first executive director of Echo. We have our founding president, Miss Rosie Norris. We have former board president, Linda Engel, as well as she is a therapist. And then last but not least, we have our current executive director, Sonja Gray. So let's start with some quick introductions. Rosie, can you tell us about what drew you into Echo?
My name's Rosie Norris. I was the first chairman of the board of Echo. When I try to remember the history of the organization and how it began, I'm taken all the way back to 1981 when I attended the National Conference on Missing and Murdered Children. It was held in Louisville, Kentucky, and it was a very powerful conference. There was one workshop I remember in particular where the panel was made up of parents of missing and murdered children. And John and Reve Walsh were part of that panel. And I don't know if you're familiar with that story of Adam Walsh, terrible, tragic story. And his severed head had been discovered in a canal literally a few weeks before the conference. So you can only imagine how raw and emotional, that was. And it was just, an experience that you couldn't leave and go back to business as usual. You had to find some way to try to meaningfully help to prevent and address missing and murdered children. And so that was kind of the impetus that I walked away with. And luckily, I was able to meet and knew a lot of very wonderful, dedicated people who cared about the children and cared about having, providing, is this safety and the protections that our children needed. So, we started meeting, we started discussing, we started trying to figure out, what might be something we could do that could contribute to the issue in a meaningful way.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Lucy, can you introduce yourself and what drove you to come to Echo?
Yes, I'm Lucy Lee, and I was the first executive director of Echo. And my story is very personal. In 1983, my son and daughter told me that they had been sexually molested by our babysitters. And I didn't know anything about child abuse. And I needed to learn desperately. And that was in May of 1983. And soon after the children had told me they'd been abused, I saw a little notice in the paper saying that this organization, Exploited Children's Help Organization, was going to have their first meeting. So I attended that first meeting and met Rosie and a number of the other people that she had drawn together, and they provided me with a tremendous amount of support and information, and that started me on my involvement with Echo, and I was involved from then on.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much for that. Linda, can you tell us a little bit about
Sure. It was about 1989, beginning of 1989. I'm Linda Engel. I'm a clinical social worker by profession, recently retired. But I had just moved to Kentucky and started a new job at Family and Children's Agency where I was counseling, families. And I had done this before. I had 3 children by this time, and we'd moved from my husband's job And one of the situations, one of the families I met, it was a little preschooler who was a cute blonde 3.5-year-old. And, mom was wondering, there was a recent separation. Mom was wondering if there was abuse involved, the way this little girl was acting. And so I interviewed. At that time, we were using some video supervision, and my supervisor watched me interviewing this little girl and watched me interviewing her mom. And we decided, we thought that maybe something was happening. Weren't sure by whom, and all this. But so as it turned out, there were investigations by the child protection people, and the person who was involved in that wasn't sure because mom seemed pretty hysterical and all this kind of thing. But it turned out that we eventually both thought this was the case, and mom was going through the whole system. And I said, well, where can I get somebody from mom to talk to understand the system? And one of my colleagues had done more of this work, and she suggested Lucy Lee. And she said, well, why don't you call Lucy Lee and see, if there's another parent or something. And I called Lucy, and immediately she got in touch with this parent, and it made a tremendous difference to the parent. And this was so long ago, and recently, that the nice part of the story is that the parent contacted me. The little girl is a nurse. Everything is good. She thanked me, which, doesn't happen so often when you hear the end of the story. So it's very special. And that was my introduction to ECHO.
And Miss Sonja, what was your introduction to ECHO? And who are you?
Oh, who am I? Yes. Well, I am Sonja Gray, and I am the current executive director for ECHO, Exploited Children's Help Organization. And I've had the honor and the privilege to meet all of these phenomenal women prior to me actually being hired on. I will have to say, ECHO found me. I didn't really search for ECHO. They were launching an opportunity for a new executive director, and a recruitment specialist actually contacted me and said, there's an opportunity that has come through my portal, and I just want to see if you're interested in this. But I'm going to forewarn you that this is kind of heavy work. And I am just one of those, I'm always going to at least seek out the opportunity. And when she mentioned talking and working with kids, I was, even more interested in what the position was. And so I looked into the job description. I did my homework and my research of the organization. And when I found out about the history and how we evolved, to be a nonprofit, my heart was just there. And my passion was there. I have been in the nonprofit sector for over 10 years working with kids, from mentorship to dance coach and things of that nature. So I've always had a big heart for children and allowing children to be able to live happy, fruitful lives. And so, fortunately enough, Linda at that time was the board chair, and I had an opportunity to interview with them. And I just went in as myself and just was hoping that they would accept me as myself, and understanding that the underlying factor of me being there is that I wanted to be a part of this work. I wanted to be a part of this family and keep up the good work that has already been done prior to me coming on board. But I just wanted to be a part of that. And fortunately enough, as you can see, they did hire me, and I've been here it's going on 9 years now. And this is probably some of the most rewarding work that I've done, even including the trauma and things of that nature. But again, to be able to support kids has always been my mission and my goal in life. So that is what brought me to ECHO.
Well, thank you all for being here, ladies. So I kind of want to go back to where we started. So how was ECHO originally founded, and why was ECHO originally founded?
Well, as I mentioned, following the National Conference on Missing and Murdered Children, I and others, went back into our communities with a strong motivation for how we could be involved and how we could be part of the solution. And so as the discussions took place and sort of evolved, it was determined that we needed to have a forum for community involvement, a forum for volunteers to get involved. Not everyone can be a trained counselor or an investigator or, a police officer. So those people obviously have very important and direct roles when there's a missing and murdered child situation or exploited child situation. But what can the average person off the street do to help address? You pick up the paper, you read about a child who's been sexually abused, your heart is broken, but what can you do? And so it was believed that there is a lot volunteers can do, but you have to organize, you have to have systems in place, you have to have programs in place. And so that was our mission, was to develop a forum for community involvement.
And around that time, there was also the Louisville tragedy of Ann Gotlib, too. So was that a compounding factor of we need to do something now?
Well, tragically and ironically, almost, Ann disappeared, very shortly after ECHO was organized. And to this day, the proximity of those two things happening so close together haunts me. But Ann disappeared on June 1st, 1983, and we were a brand new fledgling organization, but we did and have continued to over 42 years now. We have continued to stay in touch with the Gotlib family, to support the Gotlib family. Early on, we were very active and very involved in helping to distribute flyers, not just locally, but across the nation, staying in touch with the Gotlib family. There was a tree that was planted in her memory a few years after her disappearance. And on the 25th anniversary of Ann's disappearance, ECHO helped to organize a press release and a press conference, and they placed a bronze plaque at the site of the tree. And so we have tried to be very supportive of the Gotlib family. Sadly and tragically, Ann has never been found. The families have never truly had answers to what happened to Ann Gotlib.
That's tragedy. I do have one more question. So with the disappearance of Ann, as well as with the disappearance of Adam Walsh, how did ECHO first address these needs? I know you said as a forum and we are volunteer-based, but were we going out and finding kids? How was that started? And then for the now purposes, how has it changed over time?
You want any of us to answer?
Yes, please.
One of the first ways that ECHO worked to help missing children was that we started the Search and Recovery Fund. And that was a fund of money that was set aside specifically to help families whose children were missing. And we got referrals from the police department, from Child Protective Services, from counseling agencies, the Center for Women and Families. And we would get a phone call from these people frequently telling us that their child had been found, but they were out of town and they needed to get to that location to recover their child. And our fund would pay for a bus ticket or an airline ticket and hotels if need be, and to help those families go recover their missing children. And Rosie and another volunteer, Irv Klein, were the committee. The calls would come in and I would get them, And Rosie and Irv would get on a phone call with me, and we would discuss the situation and decide what ECHO could do to help those families.
Yeah. Again, we still, as an organization today, we still have the original picture and poster of Ann Gotlib, because I want to continue, honoring her, and making sure that my staff also knows the purpose and the reason as to why that you are here. We no longer do, missing searches or anything of that nature, just for the simple factor that there's other systems that have been put in place that can handle that, in a more sufficient way than what we can have the capability of doing right now. But as a resource in the community, we still too get what we call crisis calls from parents, from educators that may have a situation or an incident with a child, and they still lean upon ECHO as far as what are the next steps? Who do I go to? What are the resources that you can provide to me? And so many times we handle those. Ariel Powell, which is my director of programs and community outreach, we listen to those calls together collectively so that we don't miss anything. When someone is going through that incident of trauma, you have to know that their message is not going to always come out the way that we want to hear it. So being able to have collective ears so that we can hear everything and not miss anything, that is still very important. And we document, and then we reach out to our community partners. If we are unable to provide that resource, we make those referrals. We never want to leave a parent or an adult hanging out there with no resource, no opportunity to engage with us as far as in conversation. So we are still continuing that work to make sure that we are still an advocate for children and for families.
I think I have a unique overview of some of how it changed, because Lucy reached out to me in the 90s somewhere. There was a big federal grant that we were participating in from ECHO with Family and Children's, and I think Home of the Innocents and a few other agencies. And she wanted some advisory council people. And that was my first attachment other than that phone call. And at that time, and not long after that, couple of years, I guess I was asked on the board, and I said, sure, because I had the understanding from what I'd done. I cared about it, and I had been learning and taking a lot of workshops, professionally to deal clinically with all the issues. So I was in much better shape, I felt, to help out. But at that time, most of what we did with young children was volunteer-led. I think all of it, right? Except for maybe one or two things. And we had a base of volunteers that were very committed and who taught the different age groups. I remember that because I came in and I went to the programming aspect, the little programming committee with a few other board members. So we kind of looked at all that. And what's changed over the 30 years, the whole landscape has changed. The focus on child abuse and more professionalism and more forensics and a whole lot of things have changed. So the organization plus the volunteer world has changed, and people don't readily volunteer, because of changes in the workforce and whatever. So I've seen that transition from all volunteer to where we are now, which is hired professional, trained people, and volunteers help out. But the staff are now the ones who go into the schools and who train the parents and who train, the children, and who go out and do a lot of speaking, and the volunteers have a different role. So it's been an interesting transition to watch. And it's really neat to see the teamwork, though, and how the professionals that you started with, who met with you, who were interested back in the 80s, how some of those people are still deeply involved, whether it's a judge or it's an attorney, a Commonwealth attorney, or any family lawyer, or a social worker like me, or a therapist, and how the network has grown that way.
And I do know, because again, I wanted this to be more organic as well. I do know there's a connection with ECHO and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So I want to make sure that individuals know that we have a connection with that organization. And I think, Lucy, you mentioned that to me. Someone mentioned that to me when I first came on board. And so if someone could just talk about what that connection was.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yes.
Because Ernie Allen, who when ECHO was first organized, was the director of the Crime Commission.
Okay.
And he's an attorney, and he's the one that wrote up the Articles of Incorporation and the 501c3 status and all those things that I knew nothing about. And he definitely deserves a shout out. And Ernie became the first director of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So there's a strong Louisville connection between ECHO and other Louisville youth organizations and advocacy groups and the National Center.
Wasn't there a national organization prior to the center? Because I remember there were other places like us in Texas and Canada, and you were part of that, right? The executive directors.
It wasn't before the National Center. After the National Center was formed, I did work with a group that eventually became known as the Association for Missing and Exploited Children's Organizations, or we called it AMICO. And I was on the original board of AMICO, and there were organizations similar to ECHO all over the country. And this was a way for us all to get together and meet together and get to know each other and network with each other.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yes.
One of the things that the National Center did for me, and does for other clinicians, it still exists, and is that they have a family advocacy arm. And if you're somebody who works with children and who works with child abuse and sexual abuse, and in the field, you can fill out your paperwork and ask to become a member of their network. And the network exists throughout the country. So I know there are several people in Kentucky. I was accepted, and we have several now who are actively working now that I'm retired. But the National Center can call us if they're looking for resources for a family in Kentucky or for a person to treat a child, who's been found elsewhere. And they do a lot of training, and they occasionally offer workshops, but they do a lot of web trainings now, which are really invaluable, to somebody working with the kids and with the parents. So it's another aspect of it. Yeah.
Well, I love this conversation. I do have a question for Lucy as well as Rosie. This is around the earlier years. Who were some key partners that helped us with the building of ECHO in its first beginning years?
Rosie, you can address that more than me.
Well,
Ernie Allen.
yeah, I mean, there's so many, it's hard to know where to start, to be totally honest, but I'll give a little credit to Jefferson County 4-H.
Oh, yeah.
Because I worked at Jefferson County 4-H at the time, and they allowed us to use their phone number because we didn't have an office and we didn't have a phone. So little things like that.
We had our meetings.
We had some of our meetings at the 4-H office. Ernie Allen was with the Crime Commission, so they had a big part in it. I remember, and I'm drawing a blank on her name, but there were representatives from the Salvation Boys and Girls Club, and Grace Erickson.
Grace Erickson was with the Rape Relief
Center. And so there was quite an impressive collection of people who kind of came together and brought their different talents and their different connections and resources that pulled it all together eventually. It took some time to make it all happen. We had the Youth Detention Center eventually donated office space to us. And Lucy was reminding me this morning that there was an office supply place over in Indiana that donated $1,000 worth of supply equipment, just paper and pencils and paper clips, you know, and we were thrilled. We were like kids in a candy store, you know. So, you know, we started from scratch, and it was a lot of community support and input and involvement and engagement that built us up. Really, the key eventually was, and Ernie's sister, Kim wrote the grant for the first VOCA, and that was our first significant grant that funded the executive director position and allowed us to hire Lucy. And I'll just say this, and that was 4 years after we had organized. Yeah. So I'll just say this. I feel so strongly that ECHO had the perfect first executive director. We could not, under any circumstances, have found someone who had more commitment and more passion for the job in front of us. And now I believe that ECHO has the perfect executive director to lead us forward.
I think so too. And for my last question about ECHO's history, is there a milestone that y'all can recall, or a growth moment or a developmental moment in ECHO's history that just makes you like think back and say, wow?
Well, I think the first grant that we got from VOCA, the Victims of Crime Act, gave us enough money to pay for a staff person. And I think ECHO's mission to provide a forum for volunteerism made us be different than a lot of organizations. Where Linda worked, it was all professional staff people. And most organizations worked with staff people, and ECHO recruited volunteers. And that made a tremendous difference to the way ECHO programs got delivered. And in the very beginning, it was very important to us that we didn't duplicate any services, and we wanted to network with other organizations. So when we looked at starting a program, we would invite professionals from around the community to come serve on a planning committee with us to make sure that we were answering the needs of the community.
Yeah. And that's maintain, that not wanting to duplicate.
Yes.
Over all these years. Because
and Linda, you talked about how the organization has evolved and why they've evolved, and so the focus has changed, which is wonderful because things don't stay the same. Yeah. The needs don't stay the same. The resources don't stay the same. But I do think one thing that has remained the same has been the passion of the people who are involved, the commitment and the focus on protecting children. And one thing that has remained the same has been the commitment to prevention. That was a
Absolutely.
big, strong emphasis in many of the programs in the early stages and times of the ECHO program, and continues to be with the educational programs that you all do through the school system. So I'm thrilled that you all are still on top of that.
Well, I feel, again, I'm just sitting here kind of in awe because this is 40 years of history. And just to be on this side of it and receiving flowers from you all lets us know that we are, again, still upholding what that whole vision was, 40 years ago for this organization, and evolving as times change, but still keeping those main priorities. And our priority is to keep kids safe. And I do have a staff, a wonderful staff, that is very dedicated, very committed, to kids and to the families, of Metro Louisville, to the point where I've shared with them, one of my visions, we're receiving calls outside of Jefferson County. And I'm like, I don't know how we're going to do this, but it is a long-term vision of trying to get ECHO in other cities, because we have received just great compliments about the work that we continue to do. I am still very much a big advocate around prevention. We are a very reactive society, and I'm like, but we need to invest in prevention work, because we don't want a child to have to go through the trauma, or a family to go through the trauma. And so those priorities have always remained from day one that I walked in the door.
You mentioned the advocacy, and we haven't really talked about that. And I know that Lucy was really active in state task force or boards or all kinds of things. And probably you were too, weren't you, Rosie?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
So talk about that a little
I
bit.
served on, I can't remember the names, but all sorts of task forces and commissions at the Kentucky Alliance for Missing and Exploited Children, the Child Protection Community Council was one, I can't
State
remember.
one. I remember, that
the
was
state
the
one,
state
the-
work you did, yeah.
Kentucky Commission on Child Sexual Abuse was one that I served on. It seems like I was always going to meetings.
Same here for Lucy.
And I did a lot of public speaking also. And sometimes that was for statewide conferences, sometimes for nationwide conferences. I remember one time the American Sheriff's Association had their conference in Louisville, and I went and spoke to them. So thousands of sheriffs from across the country, and I was very, very involved with other organizations and advocacy efforts.
I know. And you were too, weren't you?
Yes, I think one thing that came to mind when you raised that question was we were strong advocates. ECHO was strong advocate for making our judicial system child friendly, if you will. And we actually implemented a couple of programs. First of all, we wrote to judges with suggestions for how to make that. Unfortunately, children are victims of crime. And children have to go and be involved in trials and testify. And so looking at that experience from a child's perspective and trying to make it as comfortable as possible. So we wrote up, a report with suggestions and sent that out to judges. I know a program that's very, very near and dear to Lucy's heart was the Christie's Kids in Court program. And children who were going to have to testify in court were brought in and kind of in advance allowed to sit in the judge's seat and allowed to sit in the jury box and just be comfortable being in a courtroom. We talked about child-sized furniture and seating and just things that would make the whole experience a little less intimidating for children. And then lastly, there was a playroom. Echo set up a playroom at the courthouse, and it was staffed a couple days a week with volunteers, and children who were in the courtroom to testify could take a break and have a place to go and play a game or read a book or, just a diversion.
We've talked about how things change, but some things haven't really changed. The need for all of that is still there. And COVID changed a little bit of that, more recently, right?
It did. We tried to keep the playroom up and running. And once COVID hit, it changed the trajectory of many things. And we saw where the families were not coming in to court because, again, of COVID and using technology, to be able to conduct court cases. And so, unfortunately, we did have to close the playroom. Also, the volunteerism was a little bit down as well. So it was really hard for us to staff that area. But we did talk with the judges, and they respectfully came to us and asked, what can we do? So we still have a strong partnership with the judges and all of that. But unfortunately, we did have to close the playroom. But we do work with CPS. And one of the things that I shifted from that is that many times children have to have supervised visitations. And so my thought was, let's again make a space in an area that is conducive for kids to come into. Let's make sure that it's bright colors and we have the coloring books and the crayons and the toys and things of that nature. So again, when parents are dealing with adult issues, we can try to distract kids as much as possible and still provide those happy environments for them. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I love that. So let's talk about the board, because we do have 2 board members here. So during your time on the board, and I believe, Miss Linda, you're a board emeritus, still active.
Our first board emeritus. Yes.
Rosie is the essential one.
Yes.
Forever, right? But
So what?
Served on the board.
Oh, you were on the board.
I was
in
on the board before I was employed.
Oh, there you go. See?
So we have 3 board members.
Everybody.
So what accomplishments were you most proud of when you were on the board? Or are they mostly the same, from having the grant funding or the playroom in the courthouse? Are those mostly those only, or are there different types of accomplishments that you're proud of just being on the board itself?
One of the things that Rosie and I worked on initially and took a lot of time was 2 booklets that we published. One was called What to Do If Your Child Has Been Sexually Abused, and the other was What to Do If Your Child Is Missing. And we wrote those booklets with help from other volunteers, and we got a grant from the Younger Women's Club to print them and publish them, and then we distributed those through the police department, through Child Protective Services, through counseling agencies like Family and Children's. And those booklets were used throughout my career at ECHO too.
Lucy and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, and I was saying that, if we looked at them now, they would we'd be a little embarrassed, because this was all before social media.
They were
technology, so it's pretty archaic stuff. But this is the truth. I overheard a woman say, when your child goes missing, there's no handbook of what to do.
No.
And I thought, wow, there needs to be a handbook of what to do.
Yeah.
Something that you can put your hand on immediately, and it's 1, 2, 3, and so that's what we did.
And I'm not a board member, but just to kind of talk about where we are with missing kids, We don't have the handbook. I feel like I'm coming in with the bearer of bad news, but really it's the evolution of where we are now. Because again, I know, what it can feel like for a parent when a child goes missing. And so we were fortunate enough to have a funder to connect with us, and it was the Child's Victim Trust Fund. And they provided us money, and they had this nice, fancy fingerprinting system. And, shine something bright in front of me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is that? And so I kept talking to the staff, and I was like, okay, so what are you all doing with this? And well, again, we're trying to make sure that parents have fingerprints of their children. I remember when I was in grade school, the schools used to do that automatically. And I found out that they were no longer doing that. And I said, you know what? This can be an area, again, that supports our mission and a gap that we can fill for parents and adults to make sure that they have fingerprints of their kids, because that's one of the first things that the police department is going to ask. Do you have any identifiable, anything, of the child that we can utilize? And so we now have a digital fingerprinting system where the parent can download an app, and all the fingerprints are readily available for the parent. And we still have what we call the old school, where you still can write out the kids' names and the ink strips and all of that. And we actually have a program that we have developed around missing kids for parents and adults. So again, if that incident happens, we're providing you with the what to do and who to call and where to call and all those types of things. So again, just carrying what you all have done, in the earlier part of ECHO, and how do we continue to do that with the evolution of technology?
Right.
I think one of the things, there were several things as a board member, that stand out to me. One was, putting together some of the fundraisers over time, because it's essential, and trying to raise our own donors, which is still, it's something important.
It's a constant challenge.
A constant challenge. It's still a challenge to rely less on just grants. And of course, now in today's environment, that's really a big issue, because the grants are disappearing on the federal level, and the justice grants and crime grants, and, which played the role, like you said, victims of crime. So really getting to the public, and, the fundraisers do that in a certain way, as well as the executive directors talking on TV when something happens. And the other thing, though, that's changed is Sonja and I looked at curriculums, because now there are curriculums, and using that word for, preventing child abuse, not just treating. And when we looked, I guess it was about 8 years ago, and we looked at several states that had begun to use so-called curriculums across the state. And we found this one in Florida from the Monique Burr Foundation that we looked at, and we had other people look at, and we thought, well, this is, pretty solid. And so after we looked at it and introduced it to the board, and the board said, yeah, let's go with this. And that's what we've been using. And so it really has given something that can be taken into the school classrooms, but they also have other parts, and they've even developed more recently something dealing with coaches and kids. With, as there's a growing awareness, that's always existed too in those relationships, the abusive behavior. And so, we still use that, and we evaluate it.
That's
Yes, yeah. And the Monique Burr Foundation for Children, we are the only nonprofit in Louisville that is implementing that program. And I know one of the things that I had mentioned, because I grew up with stranger danger, and we know 90% of children that are abused by someone they know and trust. And the language kept coming to me, have kids to find trusted adults. And I was like, that doesn't align very well with me. And it was at that point in time that we adopted the Monique Burr curriculum that they used the word safe adults. And I said, you know what? That is really going to be a platform that I'm going to stand on, is really changing that narrative of telling kids to find trusted adults, because we know that even those trusted adults have been those ones that have abused the children. And it's hard for kids, a first grader, to really define what trust looks like. But they definitely know what safe and unsafe situations look like. So we are in the process of trying to help people create this narrative of communicating with kids to find safe adults, and all of that. So, and then also the stranger danger, we base our program on 5 safety rules that can protect children either in a personal space or a digital space. That was something that, again, that I wanted to really expand on, universal strategies that can help kids. And then I got to thinking about it, not just kids, because our program now is pre-K to 12th grade. And I know when I came in, it was K through 12, but over the course of the years, we've seen where technology, again, has been an advancement, but we haven't done a very good effort of making sure that we're providing those protective factors for the 2-year-olds and the 3-year-olds and the 5-year-olds and things of that nature, because they can navigate those platforms. And so, again, we wanted to make sure that we are providing training for kids, age appropriate levels, making sure that they can walk away with something that they can remember also. So, yeah.
Yeah, that whole cyber world,
oh gosh,
didn't exist, when it started.
No.
The risks weren't the same.
Yes.
Going back to Tanya's question, I don't want to speak for Lucy, but I have to bring this up. Lucy's story, Lucy and her children's story, were an inspiration to the Blue Apple Players.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
right.
Do you want to tell them that story?
Yeah.
That's a good.
Yeah, because I can say, Lucy, you got a lot of things in your lap there.
I had a newsletter here about that. We approached the Blue Apple Players, which was a local theater group that did programs for children. And I went down and met with the 2 key people there and told them my children's story and asked if they couldn't do some sort of programming to teach children prevention of child abuse. And they came up with a play that they called No More Secrets. And it was based on what happened to my children.
Wow.
And they did No More Secrets in the schools for years. And it was a wonderful program. And at one point, they published the play. And when they published it, they dedicated it to my children, which was really special.
Yeah.
Yes, that was great. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah.
A lot of special memories. Some of them are heartbreaking and hard to talk about, but I think that, there's a lot of bright spots and things that we can know that were meaningful ways to help and protect children and help the families of abused children.
We talk about that too at Echo. We call them glimmers. So throughout, we may have, it's hard work, but there is glimmers that make us want to just go through and help us through the day.
That's a good way to put it.
It's like what I said at the beginning when this mother contacted me after 30 years.
I know.
It's a big glimmer. That is a bit, it's more than a glimmer. It's like, oh, wow, and Echo also helped her, because she talked with you. And, it takes so long to go through the court system.
Yeah.
And people don't know. It's so complicated.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating, and there's so many delays, and so that was a tremendous thing for her, as the parent too.
I love that. Earlier, Linda, you talked about challenges, especially with the climate of today. So as a board member and a person that works in a nonprofit organization, what challenges did you face while currently being active in the field?
Well, one of them is that, as I learned more, and I got involved, there were a few other colleagues who were involved with child abuse, who worked where I worked early on, and that was helpful. But then it was then Family and Children's was mainly a counseling agency back then, from '88 up until late '90s, and not everybody had the understanding. Yes, they had training and degrees, but they didn't all work with children, for starters, and they didn't all work closely with parents, and certainly didn't work with abuse or domestic violence. And that's where my energy went to after a couple of years. So it was a question of explaining why it was so important and what to look for, and training other colleagues. That was part of the challenge. And this was true. It was before we had laws that you had to take something to get your credentialing that taught you about child abuse. You had to know the law. None of that existed back then. And even the heads of the agencies, they had priorities and all kinds of things going on. So I remember early on, even wanting to have a staff training and bring it to staff was not always the easiest thing. And even afterwards, not everybody, you try your best. Not everybody would use the information you put out there, so that not everybody would ask when a kid came in with a problem, well, who have they been around, or has anybody touched you in a way that you feel uncomfortable? That wasn't being asked regularly in even the early 80s, so that was a challenge.
Okay. Does anybody else have a challenge that they faced while they were working at the organization that they may want to share?
I'm with Linda, convincing people that child abuse was really a problem. I went out and spoke to groups of people on a regular basis, and you could see in their faces that they were shocked. They had never heard anything like that. And I think by the end of my career, there had been enough attention to child abuse in the media and through ECHO and other organizations that I think the general public did realize that child abuse was a thing, and it was something that needed to be addressed. So
there are hotlines now.
Yeah.
None of that existed.
Yeah.
It was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And people resisted.
Yeah.
Was that you don't talk about things that go on.
Right.
And kids didn't know they could go and call this number. I mean, none of that.
That one thing that what goes on in the house stays in the house. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I think, raising public awareness of the issue was a tremendous challenge. And as so many others have already alluded to, there just wasn't a heightened awareness or much concern on the part of the general public until it hit home, and then it was too late. As tragic as the Ann Gotlib case is, I mean, it slammed the Louisville community with the awareness of this issue.
Wasn't Mitch McConnell, wasn't he involved some kind of way with ECHO at one point in time?
No.
But he,
Okay. No, I thought he was some pictures or something like that.
he was the county judge.
Yeah, he was county judge.
He was the county judge at the time. We had, at that time, this was before the merger. So this really makes you fully understand how long ago this was.
Okay.
But there was, a mayor and a county judge, and Mitch McConnell was the county judge.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the statutes, taking it to the laws and stuff, that began to change in the 90s, don't you think?
Yeah.
And the attorneys general, I'm thinking back, the
Dave
people
Armstrong.
Dave Armstrong, and people like that, Commonwealth attorneys and those kind of people were, because they saw it and they took it into the legal place. I mean, and now I was just thinking about the recent law for sextortion. That and maybe you might want to talk to that, because it's now on the books. So
Lucy, I echo what you were saying about being in a lot of meetings, but I think that, again, one thing that also hasn't changed is that we're still a small organization that makes big impact. And I value that. And so I do try to make sure that we are still in spaces where our voices can be heard about the work that we do. And so fortunately enough, through Kentucky Youth Advocates, there is a whole policy leg that I am a part of. And this was a new experience for me around policy. And again, kind of going back to what you said, Rosie, like, how do we educate the everyday people? So this was not my work. This is not what I went to school for. So I'm going there to learn and to listen, but also to make sure to advocate. And so, we have been doing the work around sextortion, which again is extorting kids through digital spaces. We've been doing that in the classroom probably for about 7 years. And so again, we are a reactive type of nation. And so a lot of times things don't really come to the forefront until something has happened. And unfortunately, there was a incident of sextortion with a kid. And a representative connected with the family and decided to build a bill around having harsher penalties for perpetrators and predators that are trying to gain access to our children. And I remember when we were talking about this, and I'm looking at the bill, and the one funny thing that really resonated with me, they were like, oh, well, when it comes to the kids, what we're going to do is that we're going to put posters up in the schools. And I said, that's great. I said, but have you ever been in a school? There's many posters. And I also said, what about the kids that may not be able to read just yet as well? I think that we have to do our due diligence in making sure that we are in front of the kids, that we are talking to the kids and not just putting up posters, around and, kids being able just to gloss, by it. That's not really giving us an opportunity to create those safe spaces for kids that if something has already happened, that they can identify who the safe adult is and have that conversation. We have to go one step further. And so fortunately enough, we were at, the Capitol. We got to meet with the representative, that placed the bill, and it passed as into law by our governor. And so currently I am working with a couple of community partners where we are putting some videos together for parents and caregivers. And I always still raise my hand, what about the kids? Because my priority is first the kids. And so we're going to be talking about some of those. So you should start seeing some information coming around this new once bill that is now a law, where individuals, perpetrators are gaining access to our children through digital spaces, that there will be harsher penalties for those individuals. So that's a big win for us because we've been talking about, what I always go back to that group and I said, this is what we're hearing in the classroom. We need to revisit our laws and make sure that our laws are current with what is happening in today's world, in today's society. And so that happened to be one of those. So that is a big team win for ECHO. Okay.
That was Senator Rocky Adams.
Yes,
right?
Senator Julie Rocky Adams. And she is a big supporter of ECHO, even previously to me coming on board. We did recognize Miss Adams through one of our events. And I know the tape is still rolling, so I'm going to keep talking. One of our signature events is our Pancakes and Pinwheels Awards. And my background is in special events, and I looked at this and I said, I've been part of a lot of these, these meetings and these breakfasts. And as we want to talk about ECHO, I really wanted to create a space where we could recognize other individuals that were doing the work in combating child abuse. And I remember having not the very first conversation, but the first conversation about this. And I went to Rosie and I went to Lucy and I said, I have this idea and I want to name an award after you all. And I know Rosie was like, are you sure you want to do this? And Lucy did the same thing. And I said, yes. I said, I think, just behind the brand that you created of ECHO, we need to make sure there's a way that we can always reflect upon the work that you all did prior to me coming on board. And so we do have a Norris Leadership Award that we award someone, an individual that is doing the amount of work that you all did previously, the advocacy for kids, still making sure that, our main focus is the prevention of child abuse. And so I was very honored when you all allowed me to be able to create that award. And it is still in existence today. And I hope that that award will always be a part of ECHO going forward, even far after I leave ECHO. And the other award, again, this is why I'm sitting in awe. I'm not talking a lot. I'm really learning and listening again. But Linda brought me in as the president, as the current board president. And we've had a lot of like one-to-one moments. And I don't want to tear up, but she has been one of the biggest supporters for me coming on board. I've worked with kids, but I never worked into this severity of the issues and the challenges and the problems. And I just know Linda as a therapist, when there was hard days, I would call Linda and say, Linda, this is what's going on. And she'll talk me through, and then she'd say, get out of the office, get on out of the office, and, go have some time to yourself, which she still does that to this day. And we had an award for volunteers. And I kept thinking, and it just came to me one day, it was on our 40-year anniversary. And I went to my staff and I said, Linda has dedicated a lot of time to this organization. And anybody that sits on the board, we know that typically you should have board terms. But then there's some individuals that you just can't let go of. You just can't let them go. So you got to create that space for them to continue to stay engaged with you. And so that volunteer award, I said, I really want to be able to honor the work that she's done for ECHO as well. And so now we actually have an Ingle Hart Award for a dedicated volunteer that just goes above and beyond the work of, of what you would think a volunteer would do. And so for that breakfast, because Linda knows everybody and she's in all these pockets. And I remember trying to surprise her. And I was like, how am I getting ready to do this? And I called her husband. I said, this is what my idea is. I said, but you cannot tell her. And so he's like, I think this is a wonderful honor for her. And then I started talking to her kids and I said, this is what I need, but I need this to stay a secret. And I remember the day, the pancakes awards breakfast, Linda, she's calling me and she's like, oh, my kids are coming in town and I think they're here for this event and this, I think it was like Mother's Day, something around that time. I think they're here for Mother's Day to surprise me. I was like, yeah, I think they are. I think that's exactly why they're here. Even when they came to the breakfast, she still had no idea. When I got up to the podium and I was talking about this wonderful individual, she still had no idea that I was talking about her. And then when we announced that we were changing the name of that award, again, I couldn't, think of anyone else that deserved that honor, about the commitment, not just to ECHO, but the commitment to this work that you've done in this community. When I go in the community and I mention Linda Ingle, they're like, oh yeah, Yes, I worked with Linda. And so again, not only, Echo, are we continuing the work, but we are still honoring these three ladies, by their name and making sure that when people come through the doors, they know that, we started on great foundation and footwork because of the three of you all. So that is a way for us to continue your name and your legacy of what you've done previously. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
We're all honored.
Yeah.
So I haven't heard from you. What challenges do you face in Echo as the new current executive director?
I think the first challenge when I came in is that we didn't have a really conducive system because, again, technology advances, and I really wanted a system that could really capture the work that we were doing and being able to provide those reports. I wanted to make sure that individuals knew that we were being accountable for the work that we were doing. And so that was one of the first things coming in, is looking at the systems that were there. Making sure that we're responsible to our donors for their contributions that they provide to Echo, and being able to put out an annual report to show, I guess, the management of the funds and things of that nature. So that was the first thing. The second thing, as Linda previously mentioned, was making sure that we had a curriculum. At that point in time, we were still using what I would say PowerPoints and having documented sources, but I really wanted something that was evidence-based, so that when I talk to lawmakers or schools, that I can say, we know that this work has been proven to be successful. And so I started looking at an evidence program. The third thing was making sure that I had dedicated staff. I wanted to build the staff capacity, because with 97,000 kids at JCPS and however many youth serving organizations, I always had the thought of how can we grow? Because the need is there. The capacity, we just didn't have the capacity at that point in time. And so those were the three priorities that I had coming into the organization. And then the thing was having dedicated board members that understood what the mission was and where their passion lies, and how, again, we can utilize their skills and talents to, again, just make sure that we're going forward as an organization. So those were the initial challenges. The challenge that we are facing today, and again, over the course of the years, and we've been able to survive. And what comes to mind is a board member always in my ear saying, we've always been a survival mode, and we really want to be in a thriving mode. COVID really shook things up. And at that point in time, unfortunately, we did have to lay someone off, but we still wanted to have them on board. Because I'm an optimist. So I was like, there will be a time that we'll get past this. So that was a turning point to really look at the organization and what we needed to do. And one of the first things from that is that we really had to look at our revenue streams. At that point in time, we were almost 90% grant funded by one funder. And I knew that that was not going to be sustainable. So I had to get out and meet with different funders, do my research of who is offering funding around children and youth programming, who was providing the funding around prevention efforts. And so I started meeting with these funders and these foundations and learning more about them and sharing more about who we are. And so we have diversified our revenue streams with grant funding. We are proudly supported by CoSARE for Kids. We've been supported by Child's Victim Trust Fund. We have had support from WHAS, Crusade for Children, and WellCare. So we have really diversified that as far as grant funds. As far as donor base, again, it was very important to me to make sure that I knew my donors and donors knew that they could contact us. And so we started creating these signature events again where we're recognizing donors, and we are still in the process of always trying to think of ways that we can always recognize our donors and always say thank you and the appreciation of you giving your dollars so that we can continue the work. And here recently in the past year, ECHO has always operated free at cost, and I appreciate that. But again, the model has changed. And so we knew again for us to be stable that we did have to create a fee for service. And so we haven't done that even for a year, but I'm proud to say that, I wanted to make sure that it was cost efficient. I am a small nonprofit, so I know what it's like when someone says a training is X dollars and you're like, okay, well, I can't do that. I wanted to make sure that we were cost efficient so that any organization has the ability to contract us out to come and do the work for them. And also having the flexibility that if you do not have the funds, that we're still going to try to work with you to still try to provide those services and those resources, whatever you may need. I never want to close the door on any individual, organization, school that is looking for the work that we are able to provide, because what we do is essential and it is critical for the well-being of children.
Love that answer. Every time it gives me chills.
Well, it's an extension of everything that you did.
Yes.
To get us into the schools, in the beginning. And now, which school did you finish last week? Now we educate everybody in the school.
Yes.
Which is really exciting.
Yeah. That actually came from my director, Ariel, when she came on board, and she's like, why are we only educating the 4th grade? Why shouldn't we educate the entire school? And I said, you have a point. And so now when we engage with the school, we train the entire school. It takes us about 2 weeks to get all the kids trained. But again, I thought that collectively, every child needs to hear this information. And so we wanted to make a deeper impact of making sure that not just the 4th graders knew this information or the 2nd graders, that the entire school had this information readily available for them. Once we train a school, they get a big banner. We call them our banner school. So again, after we have left the classroom, the staff still can reiterate some of those protective factors, that safety rules that we have talked about in the classroom. And so now we have, and we love JCPS. And as I mentioned, it's the word travels. And because we've been out in the community more, we have connected with family resource coordinators. Troy and I, we train all of the mental health practitioners of Jefferson County, which is over about 200 individuals. And as soon as they hear about what we do and the energetic and enthusiasm that we provide in our trainings, they contact us at, how can we get you in our school? So I'll name a few, but please hold it to my head and not my heart, because I can't name all of them. But Rutherford Elementary, Goldsmith, St. Matthew's Elementary was a new school for us this year. We have been at Zachary Taylor,
Medora
Elementary. So we are really creating a stronger relationship and partnership with Jefferson County Public Schools, that I think that we are one of the resources that they utilize when an incident happens within the classroom or something that they hear from a child as well.
Well, and I remember that we did work with the Catholic schools and stuff, and that's also happening, right? And so some of the private schools, so that continues, because there are kids everywhere,
Absolutely.
It'd be neat sometime to be able to reach the homeschool kids, which
On it.
I know well, it's on the drawing board. I know it is, because I'm thinking of how we were going to do it, through an event or something. But I mean, because kids and parents are everywhere,
Yeah, we used to have a program called Teens Keeping Kids Safe.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to Presentation Academy and worked with the senior class, and we trained them to train children. And we spent, I think, a couple of weeks in the classroom with the high schoolers. And then we scheduled classrooms for them to go in, and they taught the prevention programs. And that was a wonderful program. And it was lots of fun for the kids.
And it's interesting enough, when we are out doing our adult trainings, many will come and say, I used to volunteer with ECHO when I was in high school. And I was like, oh, you worked with Lucy, didn't you? So that, to me, again, that just speaks volumes of a small nonprofit that has major impact with so many people. Because in those adult trainings, we hear people still to this day, I wish there was something like this when I was a kid. Or it's, yes, I worked with Lucy on this project. And again, I just feel honored, to be able to continue that torch and all of that.
And I echo that. When I was in school, we didn't have this type of education. So now that I'm able to go into Jefferson County, the same public school system that I went through, and tell these kids, hey, this is how we need to protect ourselves. This is how we need to stay safe. That is so fulfilling for myself, even being in this organization. It makes me want to come into work every day. It's my driver. So I thank you all for the work that you put in. So why do you think, because we did talk about donor base and ongoing support a little bit, why do you think it's crucial for this organization today to have ongoing support?
Well,
it costs money.
We're a nonprofit, but we're a business, right?
Yeah, it costs money to do this work. And you have to pay your staff members. And you have to get the materials that you hand out to the children. All of those things cost money. And it's like running any kind of business.
Absolutely.
You need the funds to keep the business going.
Absolutely. And I think Linda touched on this a little bit earlier. The one other time that I used this unprecedented times was during COVID. We are in unprecedented times right now as far as federal supported nonprofit organizations and, receiving funds through those platforms. And with the removal of a lot of that support, that is really going to trickle down to the state and to your local levels. And again, one of the questions I always ask in the adult trainings, how many nonprofits are in Louisville? And when someone says 50, I'm like, oh, I wish there was only 50. But there's about 3,200 nonprofits, and there's only so many people, and there's only so many opportunities. So we want to say that it's not competitive, but there is a competitiveness of being a good grant writer and, who's reviewing it, and also being able to provide those funds. And as that support is great, I always talk about is the individual giving and contributions that is going to keep nonprofits like ourselves afloat. It's the people that have the same passion like Rosie when she went to the conference and was moved by that and saying, we got to do something here. The dedication of Lucy, but also being impacted by child abuse and saying, this is what my why is. And Linda as a therapist and actually hearing it, face to face from children. This issue is not going to go away. It's not going to go away, but my hope and effort is to minimize the risk of child abuse by providing the protective factors. But as Lucy mentioned, we are a nonprofit, but we operate as a business. There are materials and collateral materials that we need to be able to provide to the community. And during this unprecedented time, ECHO, we are at a critical point where we are really needing that individual support and that support from organizations to really say, we must have ECHO here for another 40 years because we understand the severity of the problem. Kentucky right now, as far as child maltreatment, we are double the national average. That is not okay by me. We had a report of over 1,500 children of maltreatment just in Jefferson County. That is not okay by me. And so I am always going to advocate that we do have the power to make sure that organizations like ourselves, and you can see the history that we have, documented history, that we know what we're doing. And we need to be here for the kids. We have to continue to be here for the kids. And so as the funding has changed, what has not changed is the passion of individuals that care about kids. And those are the individuals that we still want to come on board and support our organization. And, I know Lucy probably will say this, but it's money. We love to have love and things of that nature, but for any business, you have to invest. And I talk about this with for-profit individuals. If you was an investor of a business, you put your money where your mouth is, and you look at that product and you allow that product to grow. And at that end point, as an investor, you have the opportunity to be able to withdraw money from that. In our business model, we still need the investment of dollars. You still need to allow us to grow. So, recurring donations are wonderful because, again, it allows our organization, to keep forward with the operations, the daily operations of what we have to do. Your return of investment is not going to be money, because we're a nonprofit. We can't give money back to you. But your return of your investment is going to be your social responsibility to your community. That is the return on your investment, knowing that you did something that can negate, some of these issues that are happening with our young kids. So that's your return on your investment, is that you are socially responsible for some of the critical issues that are hurting and harming our children.
How does child abuse affect victims, not just in short term, but throughout their lives?
Oh, I was just thinking about that when listening to Sonja, because when you're talking to donors or you're talking to people who don't understand what abuse can do and how it locks a child in a place, not all children, some children have more resilience, not every child reacts the same way. And of course, how the parents or whoever gets told, if they tell, if it's a teacher or a parent, that's the first line of helping them with resilience. We all know that. But it often locks somebody into a space that affects years and years of their life, and they don't feel they have the power, just like they didn't have the power to stop being exploited by somebody bigger or older, or, they were supposed to listen to. And we have research that tells us, how important that is. Actual research.
I can speak to that with my own children.
There you go.
My daughter's 50 years old. She has a master's degree. She works as a human resources director. So she's a very accomplished individual. And sadly, she still suffers from flashbacks of the abuse that happened when she was 3, 4, and 5 years old. And she'll never be able to get away from that. Child abuse has a lifetime impact on the victims, and that doesn't go away.
And the symptoms, can vary, whether it's flashbacks or anxiety or physical symptoms, depending on what happened to you. All of that has an impact day to day, even if it doesn't happen day to day. So, it's really critical to understand that prevention and stopping, the first or whatever time, getting kids to feel they can talk. And not just kids. I mean, there's so many adults who come to us. We've all experienced that, who come up and say, I never told anybody but. And, it's amazing.
And I know we've been talking about prevention of abuse, but I think this is also it goes back to advocacy of an individual and understanding the law. We are all mandated reporters.
Right.
It is not left up to one individual or one system to report on child abuse. The state of Kentucky, as a mandated reporter, if you see something, you are to do something. So I think that's also important for individuals to know that there is a call to action, just as a Kentucky citizen, that if a child discloses abuse to you, or if you see an unsafe situation for a child, that it is your role and responsibility to make that report.
Well, thank you. And I have one more question. It's a 2-for-1 to end off on. It goes, in what ways can individuals make a meaningful difference, even if it's large or small? And what would you tell somebody who thinks that somebody else should step up instead of them?
I think that everybody has gifts that they can share with ECHO. If it's volunteering and serving on the board, or becoming a staff person, making a donation, every individual can do something to help an organization like ECHO.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it. You know, I mentioned earlier, with domestic violence survivors of all ages and the abusers over time. And safety is always the foundation, and it is for ECHO. And if you don't have safety, you can't eat well, you can't do anything if you don't feel safe.
Yeah.
That's the primary driver. So you just need to know that and get that across. And I think if you can get it across to somebody, they understand how they can be helpful. And you never know. I guess this was what I was thinking, listening to you, that if you do it once, you never know if that one time, if heaven forbid something happens to that child or that adult, if that one person's stuck in their head, and that'll be what helps them, to report it or to get help or reach out. That's the biggest thing, even if you don't see them again, and so much of what we do, we never know the follow-up, right? We may have talked to one person, and, this happened over the thousands of clients. It's such a gift when you find out later that it worked, not only, and it had a lasting impact. But I think that's true for the ECHO trainings too.
I will say I did have one of those moments. I was at a kids expo a couple of weeks ago, and a little kid walked up to my booth, and I said, "Do you go to this school?" And he said, "Yes, ma'am." And I said, "Oh, so you know the 5 safety rules?" And his parents were right there. And I said, "Can you tell me the 5 safety rules?" He had to be 2nd, 3rd grade, and he was rule number 1, and we have hand signals. Rule number 2, rule number 3. And I could see this look in the parents' eyes, and I was like, "Yeah, we've been in the classroom." And I said, and it just makes me proud to know that he is remembering those, again, just to provide the safety. ECHO, I try to keep an open door policy. If you are passionate about children, safety of children, I always have an opportunity and an ear to listen to you. You can call us. We have a website, and, one big shout out to you, Troya, bringing you on board. Troya has elevated us in that digital space with our Facebook page and the Twitter and tweet and all those things. You got to have diversity on your staff as well, just to keep up with everything. But Troya has really elevated us in that space. So even if you're an individual that, just need information, check us out on our website and our Facebook page. We are still trying to make sure that we are one of the leading organizations to provide child abuse prevention education. And then, of course, again, with the climate where we're at, it will be crucial for individuals just to help us get over this hump. So again, that we can be there. and that can still be volunteering. We have a new event that's coming up that's going to be held at Churchill Downs. If you're wanting to sit on a committee, we have several committees that, we would love to invite some new individuals, and there's board opportunities as well. So if you're wanting a place to be engaged, I would just say reach out to us and let's have those conversations.
Well, thank you all so much for being here, Lucy, Miss Rosie, Miss Linda, and Miss Sonja. I've had so much fun in listening to your insights and just hearing about your passion. And for y'all out here that's watching us today, remember that prevention is how we can first protect children. And your support allows us to do the essential work of helping and educating those children. So if you're inspired, please consider volunteering, donating, advocating for us, and to keep ECHO around for this essential work. Thank you so much.